Devil's Odds, an Ungovernable Prequel. Written by R.M. Olson. Performed by R.M. Olson. Copyright 2020, R.M. Olson. Production copyright, R.M. Olson. Jez was running for her life. She couldn't wipe the grin off her face. "She went that way, the plaguing smuggler." The voices came from behind her as she pounded down the narrow dirt streets, the dusty prefab walls of the tumble-down buildings claustrophobically close on either side. "Hey!" she shouted over her shoulder. "I have a name, you know." The air was the cool of early morning, and no one else was out on the streets yet. Just as well, probably. A blast from a heat gun sizzled off the wall of the building in front of her, and she yelped, the smell of burning prefab stinging her nostrils. She ducked as another blast crackled off the street behind her, skidded around a corner, and ran headfirst into a burly, dark-haired woman, deltoids bulging out of her tank top, and face flat with fury. "Gotcha!" grunted the woman, jerking her around before she could squirm free, and twisting her arm painfully behind her back. Jez swore loudly. 3 men and another woman in worn tunics and stained jackets rounded the corner at a run and slowed. The man in the lead gave a leisurely, menacing smile. His long-barreled heat pistol was loose in his hand, and he made no move to holster it. "Milka, you caught our little rabbit," he said. "Well done." He turned his gaze on Jez. "And you. I've heard rabbits scream when they're killed. Shall we find out?" "Dunno." She tried to shrug, but her captor was holding her too tightly. "Guess that depends if you can catch yourself a rabbit." Her heart was pounding just about as fast as a damn desert rabbit's, but she was still grinning. She couldn't help it. "Me? I'm a pilot." His face hardened, and he narrowed his eyes. "You're a smuggler, a thief, a drunk, a cheat, and a lot of other things. If we were in Prasvishoni, I'd turn you over to the police. But here, I think we'll deal with you on our own." "Really? Because it looks like you couldn't deal with me winning all the gambling chips in your kabak," she said. "You know, no one likes a sore loser." "Shut up!" He slapped her across the face. She swore again and managed a crude gesture with the hand that wasn't twisted behind her back. He smiled grimly. "You just don't know when to stop, do you?" She grinned, even through the rapidly forming bruise across her cheekbone. "Nope." Her captor twisted her arm farther up behind her back, and she swore again and bent forward to relieve the pressure. The man in front of her leaned in closer. She could smell the sump on his breath and the sour stink of unwashed body. "I know who you are. You're Lena's little pet. The child prodigy, except you're not a child anymore, and I hear Lena's getting pretty tired of you." "When you fly like I do, doesn't matter," she choked out. "You stupid innocent," he spat. "You think you're so smart, but I know you smugglers. No room for ideas or morals or your own damn decisions. If you fly for Lena, you do what you're told, and it doesn't matter how you feel about it." "Yeah, well, looks like I did what I wanted here," she managed. He drew back, eyes cold. "You think that coming here to spend your cut and get into trouble makes you free? Well, look how free you are now. You're pathetic." Her heart was pounding in her ears, the muscles in her arms screaming, adrenaline pulsing through her veins like blood. But now that she was bent low enough, she snatched the snub-nosed heat pistol out of her boot and brought the butt of it down hard on her captor's kneecap. The woman doubled over in pain, and Jez jerked free, kicking out as hard as she could. Her boot connected with the woman's shoulder, and the woman tumbled backwards into the street. "Well, but see, I disagree," she said. The man swore and raised his heat pistol. Jez snapped off a shot. It sizzled off the dirt in front of him, sending up a smell of scorched dust, and he froze momentarily. Like I said, I'm a damn pilot, free as they come. She turned and pounded down the street, around a corner, and through the doorway into the dark of the grungy docking bay. The familiar scent of ship's grease and burnt ozone enveloped her, and she half slid on the smooth, oil-slicked floor, swung herself into her ship, and slammed the hatch shut as the men and women from the Kabak burst into the hangar. She breathed in deeply, savoring the moment. Then she hit the controls, skimming low enough over their heads that they had to throw themselves aside, and burst out the bay doors, the acceleration pressing her back into her seat. The planet atmosphere burned around her as she shoved the thrusters forward and up, and then, at last, she was through. She let out a long breath as the rich blackness of space surrounded her, the peace of it seeping through her controls into her fingers, resting in her soul. This was where she belonged. This was what she'd been born for. He thought she wasn't free. What did he know? Sure, Lena had been pushing her harder lately, but Lena always pushed. Jez knew damn well how to push back. And anyways, she was going to have a word with Lena once she got in. The ship's comm crackled, and she jumped. She peered at it, then swore, the momentary peace disappearing as quickly as it had come. Someone on the planet must have sent word back to Lena about her weekend's escapades. And Lena wasn't happy. "You're gonna get yourself killed one of these days, kid," Antony growled. "And I hope I'm there to watch." Jez grinned at the scowling, muscular man in front of her. "You trying to come on to me? 'Cause, I'll be honest, you're not really my..." He grabbed her by the front of the shirt and jerked her in close. "Don't push me." His voice was low and threatening. "The only reason I haven't killed you myself is Lena still thinks your flying pays for your smart mouth. That's not going to last forever." He let go of her, shoving her backwards, and she stumbled on the greasy hangar floor, caught her balance, and smirked at him. "Nah, I think Lena thinks I'm hot." She brushed herself off, ignoring his grumbled threats, turned, and sauntered towards her ship. "Lena's on the warpath, you plaguing idiot," he called after her, voice echoing in the enclosed space. "And I swear, if she gives me the word, I'm first in line to shoot you." She made a rude gesture at him behind her back, and grinned to herself. Not her fault the plaguing mud-eater had no sense of humor. She stopped beside her ship and paused for a moment to run her hands over the body. It was a piece of crap, really. A short-haul PR-35, 20 years old if it was a day. She'd put in a couple mods, and it flew decent, nothing special, but it let her into the sky. That was the important part. Because once she left atmosphere, nothing mattered except her and her ship and the perfect, impossible, intoxicating taste of freedom. Her fingers caught on a score mark on the paneling, and she swore under her breath. Have to get Lena on side to fix it. And these days... For a moment, she let herself glance over to where Lena's personal ship sat in its own bunk. It took her breath away every time she saw it. The sleek, polished body, the smooth lines, the gorgeous shape. Sure, There'd been people Jez had come on to, men, women, whatever. But nothing and no one had ever made her feel like Lena's ship made her feel. It smelled of freedom and deep space and no one telling her what to do. She'd own a ship like that one day, even if it meant working for Lena for 40 plaguing years. Jez! She jerked her head up, and her stomach dropped. Lena had come in from the other side of the hangar, so quietly Jez hadn't heard her. Damn. Hey, Lena, she said, muscles tightening. You come to tell me how good I am after that last run? Lena narrowed her eyes. She was a head shorter than Jez. When Jez had shown up here 5 years ago as a scrawny 14-year-old, she'd already been taller than the smuggler boss. But there was something about the woman. Jez had sensed it from the first time she met her. But back then, she'd been a plaguing innocent. She'd mistaken it for presence, maybe even care. Like this stupid crew could replace the family that had thrown her out. Of course, it had all been a damn joke, but still. Lena somehow had a way of making Jez feel like a disobedient child. She wasn't physically imposing, but there was a dead, cold, dangerous look behind her eyes. But then, Jez had always been good at being disobedient. I heard what happened in Zavodna. Yeah? So you heard how I was basically an angel then? My crew, Lena hissed, does not get chased out of town for being drunk and disorderly. You are a disgrace. Guess one of your crew does, said Jez, grinning dangerously. Unless you can find someone else who can fly like I can. But I'm pretty sure you can't. And I'm pretty sure you need me around here. No, Jez, you're the one who needs me. You can't even spend a weekend on a backwater like Zavodna without someone wanting to kill you. Yeah, well, you can't seem to keep away from me anyway. She tried to smirk. I'm here because Antony said you wanted to talk to me. And I have a job for you. Lena gave a small smile that made something cold stir in Jez's stomach. Best hope you can pull it off. Come on, Lena. I can do basically anything. She was still grinning. She could never seem to wipe the stupid grin off her face when things went sideways. So, Jez, what did you want to say? Lena's voice was cold. Jez took a deep breath. She'd been hoping for a better time, to be honest. But then, there never seemed to be a better time in this plaguing crew. Lena was always on her for something. Look, I didn't like the last job we pulled. You've been putting me on all the dirty jobs lately. Lena raised an eyebrow. I see. You're the one who decides the jobs now. Jez scowled and blew out a breath. Lena, I get it. You do what you do. But we didn't have to take a pilot down. He was never going to catch us. Victor shot him for fun. Lena gave her an amused look. Jez, I knew you were an innocent, but I thought you'd grown up a bit since you came here. This has nothing to do with growing up, Jez snapped. Didn't have to kill him, that's all I'm saying. Look, I'm still flying jobs for you, okay? I'm just saying, I don't need someone messing with my work. I could have done it without killing anyone. Lena took a step closer, and the cold clenched in Jez's stomach. Jez, she said, her voice cold and amused, my little innocent. There's a reason you're a pilot, and I'm the crew boss. You stick to what you're good at, and I'll stick to what I'm good at. Deal? I could fly for someone else, Jez shot back. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought it might bruise her ribs. She hadn't been a 14-year-old for a long time. But Lena still had the power to scare her. Nothing plaguing scared her. Lena stepped closer. Ah, Jez, if you left, you'd come crawling back here a day later. You think a transport company would hire an ex-smuggler? Hell, Jez, you think anyone would hire a mouth like you? I'm not 14 anymore, she shot back sullenly, and I'm a damn good pilot. Maybe, but you're still a kid, and you owe everything you have to me. You need me. You'll fly what I say you fly, Jez Solokov, and I'll see that you grow up. The woman straightened. I have a job for you. Tomorrow. Big ship coming off Prasvishoni. I want you to go in and take the cargo. Got it? I'm working alone, Jez grumbled. Lena gave her a calculating look. You know, Jez, that's a good idea. I'll send you in alone. She leaned closer again. And you'd better pray to the lady, or whatever the hell it is you pray to, that you pull it off. She turned and strode off across the hangar floor, and Jez watched her go. The cold in the pit of her stomach was a stone now, heavy and sick. She'd never wanted to be a damn smuggler. She had been an innocent when she was a kid, too stupid to see through the nice lies Lena told about the kind of jobs her crew pulled, and why they needed a pilot like Jez, even if she was just a kid, even if no one else would hire a kid. Not anymore, though. She knew what she was doing now. And she kept on anyways. Because maybe Lena was right. One stupid decision back when she was a plaguing kid, and now she was trapped. She kicked at the hangar floor and swore viciously. Damn Lena to every plaguing hell in existence. Way too early the next morning, Antony shook her awake. Get off me, you plaguer, Jez muttered, rolling over. You got a job to fly, you idiot, Antony hissed. Lena sent me to get you up. Jez sat up, blinking, and peered owlishly around the room. The hangar bay was dark, and Lena's other pilots were sleeping on their cots, scattered through the hangar bay floor. No such thing as privacy in Lena's crew. She rolled to her feet, muttered a few choice words at Antony, and stumbled to her ship. Still hadn't got it repaired since the last job. She'd fixed it up, but it really needed some new parts. Lena was a damn skinflint, though. She turned for a moment and let her eyes run over Lena's gorgeous, beautiful ship one more time. The smooth, perfect lines of it called to her. They spoke to her. They begged her to climb into the cockpit, to run her hands over the controls. She sighed heavily and climbed into her PR-35, patting the old girl as she settled herself into the seat. It's okay, baby, she murmured. Not your fault. I could make you beautiful if Lena'd let me. Not beautiful like that, though. She felt faintly guilty at her disloyalty. Still, not much chance of her cheating on her ship, not with Lena around. But one day she'd get a big haul, big enough that her cut would give her a down payment. And then? Hell, maybe that was the reason she stuck to smuggling after all. She strapped down and nudged the controls, and her clunky baby lifted off the hangar floor, body shaking slightly at the strain. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting her hands feel the controls, her body listen to what the ship was whispering to her. Even in a PR-35, even flying for Lena, even with Antony glowering at her from the hangar bay below, this was what she lived for. She needed to fly, like she needed to breathe. She shoved the throttle forward, and the ship shot through the open hangar bay doors and pointed itself at the sky, leaving her stomach behind in a glorious burst of speed. The ship felt like it would shake itself to pieces before they broke through the atmosphere. Always did. But once they were through, Jez leaned back, letting the sweet blackness of shallow space wash over her. She had a wormhole jump and a good 3 hours of flying to reach the coordinates Lena had sent to the ship's comm. But she'd checked it before she left. She'd get there in plenty of time. Anyways, something about being out of atmosphere soothed her. It was better than a good night's sleep and a full meal. Only time in her life she didn't feel like she was going to go absolutely damn stir-crazy. It wasn't until she could see the planet in the distance that she realized what she was getting into. A shipment coming off Prazvishoni. Any shipment coming out of the system's capital city would be set up to be hard to grab. She grinned. Well, partially thanks to her. She'd pulled off a frankly incredible job coming off Prazvishoni when she was 16, and they'd made things tougher since then. Lena must have been really angry to let her come alone. Still, if anyone could pull this off solo, it would be her. She settled into her seat and studied the specs on her ship's comm. It was a long-haul ship, cargo. She didn't know what it was carrying, but then again, she never asked. Easier that way. The specs said it was packaged, and that's all she needed. That was one thing her ship had going for it, at least. Plenty of space in her cargo hold. Then she saw the ship in her viewer, blasting through the atmosphere a couple hours flight distant. Perfect. She smiled, flipping up the PR's makeshift cloaking, and nudged the controls forward. She was close enough for visuals when she spotted the 3 sleek, deadly escort ships, the same time they spotted her. She swore, feeling the beginnings of something cold in her chest. No way Lena didn't know this thing was escorted. Lena had set her up. Well, she'd be damned if she let that stop her. There were 3 of the escort ships, latest models, and 2 of them pulled off towards her. She had the makeshift cloaking, but they had the best tech. Escort ships always did. She flipped the cloaking off. No point in putting any more drag on her ship, and rested her hands lightly on the controls. They were faster, and their ships were 100 times better than her old clunker. But that didn't matter. What mattered was how you flew, and no one could come close to her. She waited until they were almost on her. Then she spun her ship on its axis and shoved hard on the control stick. The ship shot forward, pinning her back in her seat, and her pursuers shot after her. She flipped the control with one hand and pulled back with the other, spinning the ship in an entirely new direction. Her ship groaned under the strain, shaking under her hands, and the escort ships overshot, blasting forward as she took off on a tangent to them. She flipped the controls again, whipped around a piece of space junk, and hit the cloaking. It wouldn't hide her long, but then she didn't need to be hidden long. Just enough to disrupt their visuals. All she needed was a moment. Her 2 pursuers had managed to turn, and were coming back in her direction, but they didn't have a beat on her yet. She shoved her controls forward again, and grinned as the inelegant bulk of the cargo ship's sides loomed up in front of her. There. All she needed. She played the controls gently between her fingers. Her systems wouldn't pick her up through this. Transport ship? Maybe. Cargo? No chance. Gently, like she was tugging on a hangar spider's web, she pulled her ship in alongside the cargo bay and snugged up. Perfect. They'd be flying circles looking for her, and she'd disappeared. Take that, Lena. She flipped the modded airlock and waited until she felt the familiar pressure in her ears that meant the lock had sealed itself to the side of her target. Then she jumped from the seat and ducked through to the back of the ship. She opened the airlock doors and stepped through to the cutter compartment beyond. She was suctioned onto the side of the larger ship's paneling, and she ran her hand gently along the black surface, pitted from long hauls in deep space. She flipped on her comm and checked the specs. Never hurt to be careful. But she'd been right, as usual. She was snugged up exactly where she needed to be, against the cargo hold. She held her breath and pulled down the cutting lever. The ancient cutter arm clanked and groaned to life, tracing a circle just smaller than the airlock on the cargo ship's rugged hull. The cut path glowed white-hot, and then, as melting metal dripped to the utility floors of her ship's cutter compartment, a section of the hull fell away and clattered to the ground at Jez's feet. She stepped over it carefully and ducked her head through the hole and into the other ship's hold. She frowned. The cargo hold should have been full of the heavy boxes pictured in Lena's report. It was empty. A chill stirred in her stomach. And then an alarm blared through the ship, the sound of it almost a physical assault. She staggered backwards as doors around the cargo hold burst open, and grim-faced security guards in full gear flooded through the doorways, heat guns raised. Damn! She leapt back into her cutter compartment over the fallen piece of hull as laser blasts glanced off the inside of her ship. So they had lasers too, figured. She dropped to the ground as the air above her shimmered with heat from one of the heat guns. There were 24 of them at least. The doorways behind them into the main ship had sealed shut, closing off everything except their tethers, and they were already halfway across the floor. No time to detach the airlock before they reached her, and they damn well weren't coming on to her ship. She glanced around, then snatched up the heavy section of hull, heaving it into place. Another laser blast hit it and ricocheted off at an angle, burning a long scorch mark into the roof of her ship. She cursed under her breath. She braced the piece of hull in place with her shoulder and kicked the cutter lever backwards. There was a hiss as the sealant began, painfully slowly, to fill in the cut with glistening new patch fab. The guards reached the recently cut hull and began pounding on it with the butts of their weapons, making the cutter shudder and patch fab spill onto the floor with each blow. She swore, shoulder still braced against the piece of hull, and yanked her heat pistol from its holster. Shoving it up against the unfilled crack in the hull, she took aim and fired, the blowback heat from the blast singeing her eyebrows and scorching the tips of her hair. The blows stopped abruptly, and muffled cursing from inside the cargo ship filtered through the noise of the cutter. She grinned. The cutter shuddered again, creaked, and died. She glared at it in disbelief. For the 17 demons' sake, this was ridiculous. She kicked it again, and it coughed back to life. She needed a new damn ship was what she needed. She squeezed off one more heat blast through the crack before the agonizingly slow cutter finished its work. Then she ducked back into the cockpit. Time to leave. She'd have to figure out another way to get the cargo later. Of course, now they were expecting her. It wouldn't be easy next time. Still, she was going to do it because she had a feeling that Lena had been looking for an excuse to get her beat up again or thrown out, and Jez would be damned if she gave her one. She shut down the airlock, fired up the thrusters, and hit the controls. Nothing happened. Her stomach dropped. She swore, pushed the stick backwards, and tried again. Nothing. She clenched her teeth and shoved the throttle forward. The ship shook, trembling under her hands, and the metal in the battered hull groaned and whined, but the ship didn't move. Her ship's comm blinked with an incoming transmission. "We have you on maglock," said a stern male voice. "Don't try to fly off. You'll break your ship apart. If you come quietly, We have no intention of hurting you. We'll just take you in. Please stand by to open the hatch doors. She hit her own comm. But see, I watched your people fly back there. I figure it'll take you a couple standard hours to figure out where the throttle is on your ships, and I don't have that long. Pilot! She hit the comm button off and glared around her at the cockpit. Already she could see on her controls the red dots that meant the escort ships. She had maybe 30 seconds. Maglocks. What could she... She grinned, glancing down at her control panel. Wouldn't be good for the old PR-35, but probably better than being blown up, which was her next option. She strapped in, grabbed her helmet from the floor compartment, and pulled it over her head, biting down on the oxygen release. Then she took a deep breath, hit the ship into reverse with one hand, and with the other yanked down on the airlock pressurizer. The pressurizer hissed in protest, and she kicked the override as the light began to flash. She hit the button to seal off the cockpit. The escort ships were almost on her now. 10 seconds. Pilot, stand down. She mashed the comm with her elbow. I'll stand down when you stop being ugly, you dirty plaguer. Just a few meters away. With a quick motion, she flipped a switch, and there was a hiss as the tank of reclaimed hydrogen emptied its contents into the pressurized airlock compartment. Then she hit the remote button for the cutter with one hand and jammed the throttle forward with the other. There was a deafening boom as the cutter ignited the pressurized gas, and the ship shuddered and lurched, the flames swallowed up as the explosion broke the seal of the maglock. Come on, baby. You can do this, she whispered. For half a moment, she wasn't sure if it would. Then the engine caught and the ship jumped forward, obeying her hand on the throttle. And then the ship jolted again, spinning crazily, the controls going loose in her hands. Her controls lit up red with a damage report she didn't have time to read, as another shot from the escort ship slammed into her damaged shields. Damn! Damn, damn, damn! She was headed straight for the cargo ship now, her controls haywire, her throttle still jammed full forward. She yanked it back, but the ship didn't respond. Damn! She cut power to the thruster and pulled the stabilizer engines online, reversing them and hitting full power. Her ship skinned by the tip of the cargo ship with centimeters to spare, and she let out a quick breath of relief, glancing back to assess the damage. Her back hatch flapped open, metal bent and twisting, and to her right she could just make out the end of her starboard wing torn off by the shot and floating almost free. Her throttle was jammed, and as soon as she put it back online, she'd lose steering. Still, could be worse. Probably. The comm blinked again, and through the red, flashing damage report, she caught sight of two smaller red dots. They'd come around the side of the cargo ship, and were moving purposefully towards her. She clenched her teeth as another shot slammed into her port, knocking the hatch almost off its hinges. They were still after her, and apparently they'd given up on taking her in. She'd been right, anyways. It could definitely get worse. She pushed the stabilizers forward half-heartedly, but it was no use. Without her thruster online, she was flying dead. The ships were coming in, one from each side, and they'd be on her in a moment. Of course, her guns were still online. They were the only things on the ship that Lena had shelled out to have repaired. For a moment, her hands hovered over the controls. She could do it. It wasn't like it had been with Victor. She wouldn't be shooting them for fun, and right about now, she was about out of options. But hell, maybe those plaguers flying the damn escort ships hadn't had any more choice in the matter than she had flying smuggling runs. Damn you, Lena, she whispered. She took a deep breath, pulled her hand off the weapons control, and pointed the stabilizers directly down. The ships swooped in together, and at the last second, she hit the stabilizers and pulled the thruster back online. Her ship lurched forward and up, and the shots that should have disabled her passed a whisper's width beneath her hull. Her two attackers' shields lit up from the friendly fire, and she almost laughed out loud. They weren't going to stop, of course. They were going to keep trying until she was nothing but a cloud of space dust. But then, they hadn't tried to take down Jez Solokov before either. She glanced around quickly, then kicked the main engine offline again, shut down the thrusters, and pushed every last bit of power into the forward shields. She was grinning. She couldn't help it. All three ships were on this side of the cargo ship now. No one to watch the other side. She was hardly a threat. Her ship looked like it was about to fall to pieces. She glanced behind her quickly at the odd protuberance beneath the cockpit of the cargo ship. Maybe the size of something like a storage compartment. And, well, she was pretty sure she'd figured out where the cargo had been stored. All three ships advanced, and this time she didn't bother with the stabilizers. The first shot glanced off the shield, but she played with the shield power, keeping her ship straight as it drifted backwards from the blow. Another hit from the other side, but she managed to take the blow with the starboard shield and keep herself on course. One more bolt slammed into the shielding, jolting her backwards. She glanced down at the comm. Enough power for maybe 2 more hits, if that. She tapped the comm carefully, tuning into the general channel. "Nah, she's dead," one of the pilots said. "No reaction. Didn't even try to shoot back. Probably blew out her compartment lock when she pulled that last stunt." "Pirates," another pilot said in disgust. "Someone told me back in Prosvishoni that all these precautions were overkill. Let them spend a day up here." "Change their tune pretty quick, I imagine," the first pilot replied. The ships were pulling away from her, falling back into line with the cargo ship. She glanced over her shoulder. She'd measured her trajectory perfectly. The ship would pass directly over her, maybe 10 meters away. Right about now. She grinned and hit the cable harpoon, and her poor ship shuddered and jerked as it was yanked after its quarry. She retracted the cable carefully until she was snugged up against the bulk under the cockpit. It was shaped in such a way that it would be hard to even see the flat silhouette of her battered ship, if you didn't know it was there. She smiled to herself and stood, sealing her helmet. First things first. Good thing she always brought a full tool set on these damn missions. The thing about flying a beater was, she was good at repairs on the go. By the time the cutter had finished its hole from the secondary airlock, she had the thruster steering back online, and the cargo door could close again. Not perfectly, but it would seal well enough to hold the cargo in, and that was all she needed. This time, when she stepped cautiously through the hole made by her cutter, she smiled. There they were, stacks upon stacks of gray boxes, just like Lena had said. She grabbed a handful of anti-gravs and snapped one to each box, then pushed them ahead of her into the cargo hold. 10 minutes later, she was done. She sealed the hole, climbed into the cockpit, and touched her hands gently to the controls. And this was where she'd find out how good she'd been. Gently, she detached the harpoon from the bottom of the hull. She flicked a stabilizer for just a second, just enough to push her away from the massive ship, and then sat back, muscles tight with adrenaline. The escort ships approached, red dots on her screen, and she held her breath. But they didn't even slow. As far as they were concerned, she was just another piece of floating space junk. She grinned to herself and settled back into her seat. Too bad she couldn't be on the general channel when someone finally checked the compartment. She was humming to herself as she set her course for Lena's. Not too bad for a day's work, and with a piece of crap PR-35 too. Not everyone could have pulled that off. In fact, she was probably the only one who could have. She was born to fly. She gave them a couple hours to figure out what she'd done. Then she flipped her comm to the newscomm channels. A woman spoke into the screen, and Jez smiled to herself. Looked like they'd caught on. Directly from under the noses of 3 escort ships, the woman was saying. Companies are frantically scrambling for some sort of security that will prevent these attacks. But this ship seemed to have it all. Escort ships, false compartment, hired security on board, and even a maglock. The robbery is reminiscent of another that took place 3 years ago, again out of Prequel. Although it was rumored that a smuggling cartel was behind it, the pilot, who managed to steal an entire cargo from a ship that should have been impenetrable, was never caught. As that was the impetus for today's security measures, we'll go now to footage from that day. The screen cut to a crowd of people standing out by one of Prequel's ancient loading docks, and Jez leaned forward. She'd been a kid back then. She'd never actually watched this. And then something uncomfortable twisted in her gut. A man in a tattered coat stood near the front of the crowd, tears tracing down his cheeks. A woman stood beside him, her face pale and haunted, staring up into the sky. A reporter approached the couple, holding out his comm. "Can you tell me, sir, did you have investments in that cargo?" The man didn't speak, just nodded. He looked stunned, his face registering the sort of dazed confusion of a person waking from a dream into a place they didn't recognize. "And how will the robbery affect you?" "It will kill us," said the woman at last, softly. "It was everything we had. My son is in university. He worked so hard to get there. I told him..." Her voice choked, and she turned away, shaking her head. Jez tapped the comm off and stared sightlessly out the cockpit window. She felt suddenly sick to her stomach. She'd been proud of that job. She'd been proud of this job. Was there another family, today, standing at another loading dock, watching everything they'd worked for vanish before their eyes? Had there been a family last week, when Victor took down that escort ship and the pilot with it? There was something cold and hard in the pit of her stomach. She flew what Lena said she'd fly. Had, since she'd signed on 5 years ago. And today, she was suddenly quite certain Lena had intended that she leave another pilot dead. What had she said? She'd see Jez grow up one way or another? Maybe the man back on Zavodna had been right. She had been a damn innocent. She'd been an innocent for a very, very long time. She'd never really been free at all. Antony was waiting when she got back. "You made it," he grumbled. He'd probably been hoping she wouldn't. "Course I made it, stupid," she said, trying to grin. But for some reason, her heart wasn't in it. She left the ship loaded and ducked out through the hangar bay door into Lena's office. The woman looked up, and for half a moment, she looked startled. "Jez." Her composure returned so quickly that it was hard to tell it had left. "You did the job?" Jez scowled. "I always do." "Should I have your ship's weapons looked at?" There was just a hint of a smile pulling at the corner of the woman's mouth, but it wasn't a nice smile. Jez's heart was pounding. She'd been right. Didn't have to fire them. Lena raised an eyebrow. Jez took a deep breath. Listen, Lena, I'm through with these jobs. Give me my cut. Give me a decent ship to fly. I've earned it. But I'm not pulling another dirty job. Jez, my little innocent. Lena shook her head and leaned back in her chair, predatory smile on her face. You think it's that easy. You can have your cut, sure, but you'll fly what I say you'll fly. No, maybe you're right. I'm stuck being a smuggler, but I'm picking my own jobs from here on out. Smuggling? Fine. But I'm not pulling another cargo ship robbery, and I'm not flying with someone who shoots everything that moves. And I'm damn well not going to be set up again. Lena stood and walked carefully around from behind her battered desk. Jez, she said, and her voice was low. This is my crew. You'll fly every cargo robbery from here on out. You'll fly with Victor on every job. If I say you'll shoot down a pilot, you'll do it. I've had you for 5 years now, and I know you're stupid as hell and stubborn as a marsh bull, but I'm going to beat that innocence out of you if I have to kill you to do it. Do you understand me? Jez glared at her, hands shaking with anger. In the back of her mind, she could see the stricken man at the loading dock, still staring up at the sky. That had been on her. And whatever similar scene was playing out right now, that was on her too. She'd never been free. She'd been lucky today. Well, she'd been damn good, but she'd been lucky too. She'd gotten away with it. But Lena would keep sending her out over and over and over, and one day, she wouldn't be lucky. And maybe by that time, she wouldn't even care. She'd shoot down a pilot as easily as Victor had, and wouldn't think about it twice. Something caught in her throat, and for a moment, she couldn't breathe. She turned and stalked off, not even bothering to make a rude comment as she left. Lena! You need to get out here, now! Lena jerked awake, swearing. Antony was pounding on the door, and she jumped to her feet, slipping her pilot's coat over her pajamas before she pulled open the door. She hadn't survived leading a smuggler crew for this long without being able to deal with emergencies. Antony was standing outside the door, his face pale. What is it? She snapped. He shook his head and gestured for her to follow. Lena never showed fear. Everyone in the crew knew it. But something cold settled into her chest as she followed Antony into the hangar bay. It took her a moment to see it, or rather, to realize what she wasn't seeing. Then she let loose a long string of curse words that would make that idiot Jez proud. Where's my ship? She hissed at Antony. Tell me what happened to my ship. She was already striding across the floor to the bay where she'd stored it. She'd paid almost a year's worth of profits for that thing. Best ship on the market. There was no way it was gone. But it was. Antony had come up and was standing nervously behind her. Who's missing? She said, without turning, her voice strangely hoarse. She already knew, somehow, what his answer would be. Jez is gone, he growled, and none of the crew knows where she went. Lena smiled bitterly. I think I can guess what she was driving, at any rate. When did you notice it was missing? One of the pilots woke me right before I came and got you. Some noise woke him up, and then he noticed the ship was gone. Good. Lena's words were flat and deadly. She can't have much of a start on us then. That ship is good, but I'll find her, and I'll make her wish she'd never been born. She turned and strode to Victor's ship. Nothing like hers, but still a fast model, sufficient for what she needed. She climbed into the cockpit and hit the starter. Nothing happened. And then she noticed the chip pinned to the controls. Slowly, she picked it up. Her hands were shaking with anger, and it took her 2 tries before she could slip it into the comm. Jez's stupid, grinning face appeared on the holoscreen. "Hey, Lena," she said. "Thought you'd come to this ship first. Don't bother. I put a damn wall spike through the thruster. Well, okay, every thruster, on every ship." She paused. "Left my old PR-35 running if you want to give her a spin. Not sure how well my steering patch will hold, though." She paused again, then grinned wider. "Actually, I put a spike through it as well. Just thought it would be funny to see you climb into the old beater. Don't worry. You can use my cut of the last few jobs to fix everything up. Figured I owed you that much. Besides, I stole some of the cargo I picked up for you yesterday. Give myself a start." She leaned closer to the screen, her face distorted by the proximity, but still, somehow, smug. "So, guess I'm picking my jobs after all, you bastard." Lena slapped her hand down on the comm, and the holoscreen disappeared. For a long time, she stared out of the cockpit window. "Lena?" came Antony's voice from below. "I'll kill her," she said softly, once she'd climbed down. "I don't care how long it takes, or how long I have to look. I'm going to find that damn lunatic, and I'm going to kill her, and I'm going to get my ship back." Antony nodded, glaring out the ship's door in the hangar bay. It was open, and the chill of the morning air flooded in. "I'll gladly take that idiot apart with my bare hands," he said, "just as soon as we find her." As soon as they found her. If they found her. The ship, Lena knew, was very, very fast. The ship was everything Jez had hoped, everything she dreamed. It sang to her sweet songs of freedom and speed and deep, deep space. She leaned back and closed her eyes as the black of shallow space enveloped her, her grin so wide she wasn't sure it still fit on her face. "Well, Lena," she said to no one in particular, "guess I'm not such an innocent anymore." Really, it was too bad there hadn't been a newscom to catch Lena's reaction, because Jez was pretty sure she could watch that every day for the rest of her life. So maybe she'd still be a smuggler. Lena was right about that, at least. But she'd pick her crew, and she'd pick her jobs, and none of them would involve ragged-looking men staring up at the sky with tears tracing down their cheeks. A ship like this? No more Lena, no more Antony. If that wasn't freedom, well, then she wasn't sure what was. She ran her hands along the sleek control panel. And anyways, if she was going to be a smuggler, at least she'd be the smuggler with the best damn ship in the system. This has been Devil's Odds, an Ungovernable prequel. Written by R.M. Olson. Read by R.M. Olson. Thank you for listening.